Morning, everyone. The reading is taken from Romans chapter 5, verses 1 to 11. Therefore, since we have been justified through faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have gained access by faith into this grace in which we now stand, and we boast in the hope of the glory of God. Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit, who has been given to us. You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Since we have now been justified by his blood, how much more shall we be saved from God's wrath through him? For if, while we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to him through the death of his Son, how much more, having been reconciled, shall we be saved through his life? Not only is this so, but we also boast in God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have now received reconciliation. May the name of the word of the Lord be praised.
Thanks, Kathy. I don't know if you picked up, Douglas in his little video there made reference to his dad, who was very clever but had a tendency to over-explain things. I chuckled when I heard that, and I like to think I'm very clever. I certainly know from the rolling eyes of my children that I have a tendency to over-explain things. But I'm in good company, because the Apostle Paul is a great over-explainer. If you've ever tried to read through some of Paul's writings, particularly, say, the book of Romans, the letter to the Romans, you will know that Paul likes to explain things in great depth and detail. And today we're going to look at just a little portion of Romans, just chapter 5, just the first little bit of chapter 5. And in fact, I'm only going to focus on the first couple of verses, because that's about all I can manage in the time that you would be willing to stick with me. And I would encourage you to do a couple of things. Firstly, if you've got a Bible on an app or you've got a Bible handy, find Romans chapter 5 and just have it set aside. We're going to come to it eventually, but I'm going to do a bit of background work first. So it'll be useful to have that there. I think we'll also potentially have some of the text on the screen at times. The other thing I'd encourage you to do is, after the service, sometime this week, read the backstory. Read Romans 1 to 4 if you can manage it, just to make sense of Romans 5. There's some little homework for you. Now, we're in Romans because we're resuming a series that we started a while ago, a series on epic Christian truths. Now, I have to confess, when Tracy said to me we're resuming this series, it took me a moment to remember that we'd actually been doing this series, because we've had such an exciting lineup of, we've had the Advent and Christmas season, and we had Wayhan with his wonderful, what was that great title that he had? Someone reminded me before, for the Sweet Mothers of God, that's right. And so we've had these great little series, but before that we were looking at some of these epic Christian truths. And so that's where we're back to starting from today, and there'll be some more rolling on over the next few weeks. Now, today's official sermon title is How Can We Have Peace and Hope? And it's a good title, and that is what I want to address. But I will admit, I think a more apt title for today may be Confessions of a Pessimistic Christian. So that's my little subtitle. You can go with whichever one resonates with you the most. But stick with me, because it turns out that even the most pessimistic of us as Christians still have cause for hope and reasons for peace. So if I'm right, it's the 2nd of January, the first Sunday of 2022. I know there's been a lot of trepidation and speculation about what 2022 will hold. No one's quite game to make any predictions because it's not gone so well for us in the last couple of years. But like it or not, on Friday night, we said goodbye to 2021. We welcomed in the new year. Now, I wonder, just out of interest, and I'm not going to hold you to them, and I'm not even going to ask you to share them, but did anyone make a New Year's resolution or two? Are you willing? Is anyone willing to put their hand up and admit that they made a New Year's resolution? I've seen a few. There's some slow hands. They were getting some momentum. So there are still some of us that, I say some of us, I'm not sure I can really include myself in this. Some of you are still willing to go into the new year with some bold resolutions. The rest of us, now maybe you were never into New Year's resolutions. Maybe this is nothing new. Or maybe you are feeling a little bit over looking towards the new year. Maybe the last couple of years have sort of knocked that hope out of you a little bit. Now, let me reassure you that you're not alone in that. There was an article that appeared in The Age a few days ago, and it was titled, "The Year of the Flesh-Eating Zombies. Melburnians keep their expectations real for 2022. Sounds exciting, doesn't it? Sound encouraging? The article included some comments from various Melburnians about their feelings on the new year. Let me read to you a couple of those comments, and you might see some up on the slide as well. Here's one. My partner, and this is where the title comes from, my partner and I were joking that 2022 will be the year of the flesh-eating zombies, she joked. I have a bit of apprehension going into 2022 that I disguise with dark humour and a little touch of nihilism, because it's a coping mechanism for me, and that covers up that I'm unsure. That was a Sarah Liversidge. Another comment. Vintage furniture restorer Kate Hopkins said she saw a joke on Twitter by comedian Kirsty Waybeck suggesting that, and I like this, we should all agree to ignore 2022 until it showed us that it has learnt from the previous 2 years. And she says Kate says, I thought, yeah, that's how I feel, she said. I'm just trying not to have any expectations, and I feel like we're just going to have to ride it out, she said. So perhaps you resonate with some of those thoughts. Perhaps that's where you're feeling at the start of this new year. I mean, there's plenty to be depressed about. There are plenty of reasons to be concerned, and that's even leaving aside the obvious ones like COVID and climate change. I mean, they're the big ones. But look, let me give you a starter list from this great little book. Here's some fun holiday reading. Tracy loves a book recommendation. Here's my recommendation for you. It's a little book, take you no time at all to read, and it's called The Pleasures of Pessimism by Natasha Moore. It's part of a great little series called Reconsidering. I'd recommend the whole series, but this is one of my favourites. And Natasha Moore gives us a little starter list from this book of things that give us cause for pessimism. Here's the list. You might see it up on the screen too if you can read it. IQ rates are falling in developed countries. Our indoor sedentary life is killing us. Weapons of math destruction, don't know if you've encountered these ones, it's big data, are increasing inequality and destroying democracy. Cancel culture is coming for us all. Millennials bring their mums to job interviews. Smartphones have destroyed a generation. And my children just rolled their eyes at me once again. So are we feeling miserable and hopeless yet? I can see some of the natural pessimists amongst you are right on board with me. There's some nods and yep, the world is in a mess. A few of you, I think I might have some new converts. Although I can still see there's some of those eternal optimists amongst you, still fixing that smile on your face. I can see it under your mask, and encouragingly whispering words of encouragement to people around you. Oh, it's not all that bad. There are plenty of good things happening. You've got to admit, though, it's pretty easy to be a pessimist at the moment. I mean, I think I'm in pretty safe territory. If you haven't picked it up, I put myself in the pessimist category. That's my basket. So what's the appeal? What is the appeal of pessimism? Well, it's fashionable. I mean, I am on trend, and if you're with me, you are on trend. Natasha Moore, again, from this wonderful book, puts it this way. Optimism is primary colours and American tourists in Europe and George Clooney as Batman and IKEA and lift music and Etsy. Pessimism is Reddit and bands nobody's heard of, and Christian Bale's Batman, and SBS and cold brew coffee. Pessimism is the more sophisticated, worldly wise cousin to optimism's country mouse. Now, if you've seen the latest Spider-Man movie, you will recognise the pessimist's mantra as declared by Spider-Man's wonderfully cynical girlfriend, MJ, who says, "If you expect disappointment, you will never be disappointed." Pessimism is fashionable. It's also thrilling. Don't miss the excitement. There's a reason why so many dystopian, post-apocalyptic books and movies have been made and have been so big over the past decade or so. Because pessimism is thrilling. There's a lot of excitement in imagining the worst that could possibly happen. And lastly, honestly, pessimism is a measure of our desire for something better. So the potential advantage, I think you might have missed this, the potential advantage of a disaster is that it lets us start again with a clean slate. I mean, you've heard this said, I'm sure. Finish this sentence any way you like. The COVID pandemic will change forever the way we do, and you can fill in the gap, education, healthcare, community, business, whatever it is. Now, I said when I started that this sermon should probably be titled Confessions of a Pessimistic Christian. And I do want to dwell just a little bit longer in that space. But, spoiler alert, I am setting you up. Pessimism is not the worldview we are looking for. What's wrong with it? Let's start with just taking us down a peg or two. There's three big problems with pessimism. The first one is that it's easy to get it wrong. It's easy to be in error, to make mistakes. It turns out it's difficult to make predictions about the future. From forecasting the weather to predicting the end of the world, apparently we are statistically really, really bad at predicting the future. So it's all very well for the pessimist to say, oh, we can see where it's all headed, it's all disaster. We're probably wrong, because statistically we've been wrong most other times. So the trouble with pessimism is that it leads to error. It also leads potentially to ignorance. See, we all have a tendency towards confirmation bias, and as a committed pessimist, it's very easy to focus on the negative data that confirms our worldview while conveniently ignoring any information that suggests things aren't as bad as we might think. Error, ignorance, and lastly, and this is the worst one, polarisation. Here's a big problem with pessimism. It's not simply that everything's going to hell in a handcart, it's that they are driving it. Whoever they are, a part of the pleasure we take in our pessimism lies in our outrage, our self-righteousness, the conviction that a significant portion of our fellow citizens are dangerous lunatics, or at least up that end of the political spectrum, and they're ruining everything. And so we become more and more polarised. So maybe pessimism's not so great after all. And you know what? Christians are not called to be pessimists. Jesus was no pessimist. You don't have to look very far in the Gospels to figure that out. And he didn't call his followers to have a life of pessimism. Even in the face of all that seems wrong with the world, Christians are not called to respond with pessimism. But just to reassure the pessimists amongst you, neither are we called to some sort of naive and baseless optimism, the kind you find in greeting cards and Pinterest posts. In the reading from the book of Romans that was read earlier, we heard Paul declare that as Christians, we have peace with God, we glory in our suffering, which produces hope. It's not pessimism, it's not optimism. So what is it? Where does it come from? Well, it all comes down to how we view the world. Let me give you a quick snapshot, a quick tour of 4 different ways we can view the world, 4 big worldviews, the fourth being the one Paul's operating from as he speaks in Romans chapter 5. Now, I've gone to great lengths to track the data and give you a little pictorial of each of these, so I hope you appreciate the time I've spent on them. First worldview, the optimist. Let's start with the optimist for once. The arc of human history for the optimist bends inexorably towards progress. It's all on the up and up. We might have a few blips, but eventually we're going to get there. It'll all be okay. Now, that sounds good, and it's maybe true on many measures. But that puts a lot of pressure on us, and in fact, flies in the face of what the world is currently experiencing. So for the optimist, for all your smiles, the weight of responsibility is crushing. I mean, COVID, global warming, cancel culture, all those other things, it's all our responsibility to fix. I have a theory that that's part of the reason, a small part in a complex picture, but part of the reason why so many people are struggling with anxiety and with a whole lot of other issues, because if all we have is this optimistic hope that we'll fix it, we'll get there, that's way too much pressure for us. But that's what the optimist worldview looks like. So what's the opposite then? Well, the pessimist. The arc of human history is doomed to destruction. It's pretty easy, we just flip the graph and there we have it. Now, if we're all doomed anyway, the great thing about that is there's not so much pressure to try and fix anything. So we're relieved of that. But there's a whole lot of guilt, because essentially it's all our fault. COVID, global warming, cancel culture, you don't have to fix it, but you did it. It's all our fault. So the optimist is staggering under the burden of responsibility. The pessimist is staggering under the burden of guilt. Not great. But there's another option. Our third option is the fatalist. Human history is cyclical. We're destined to just ride the cycles out. It looks a little bit like that. And it just goes, I should have indicated it's a never-ending graph. It just keeps going. In this view, there's no ultimate outcome. We're not headed to a great nirvana of progress achieved or a great destruction or doomsday event. Instead, we're all just stuck in an endless cycle of good and bad, which ultimately we have very little control over. So COVID, global warming, cancel culture, that's just our lot in life. Just what it is. You hear a lot of people saying, and I've said it myself sometimes, it is what it is. It's helpful to a certain extent, but it's very unempowering. It is what it is, and I can't do anything about it. Which brings us then to our fourth worldview. I didn't try and draw a graph for this one because it gets complicated, but it has elements of each of the other three in it. The worldview that we find in Scripture, the worldview that Paul draws on in Romans 5, the Christian worldview. Now, it bears up to the reality that we experience. Human history is in some ways cyclical. Read the Old Testament and watch the journey of the people of Israel as they rise and fall and rise and fall and rise and fall. Step back and look at the bigger picture of human history. And it is cyclical, but it is not never-ending. God has intervened and continues to intervene in the course of history. The world, the universe was made good, and in its broken state, God is acting to restore it. There is an end, and it's a good end. The cycles will end, but not through human endeavours, but through the work of God, through the saving work of Jesus. So with that worldview, with that lens, let's look at Romans 5 and just very briefly unpack how that brings us to a point, not of pessimism, not of optimism, not of fatalism, but a point where we find peace with God and hope for the future, and, somewhat controversially, glory in our troubles. So the chapter starts, and if you had it set aside, now's the time to grab it. Chapter starts, therefore, since we have been justified through faith. Now, as soon as you read Paul and you have a therefore, he's referring to everything he said before. So chapters 1 to 4. Because of what I've just said, we've been justified through faith. And this is the premise on which everything else is built. Now, Paul spent 4 chapters detailing it. I'm going to sum it up this way, and this will kind of lead us into where we're going. Imagine a conversation between our worldviews. Let's sort of personalise each of our worldviews and get them together for a conversation. And so your optimist, your pessimist, and your fatalist are all gathered together, and God shows up and is looking at the state of the world and shaking his head and looking at our 3 other worldviews. And they enter into a conversation because God's looked and said, this is not the way it's meant to be. And the optimist says, no, We can make it right. We're getting better all the time. Really, we are. We're getting better. If we just try harder, we'll get there. To which God replies, is there any of you perfect? All have sinned and fallen short of my glory. You cannot justify yourselves by your works. And the optimist hangs his head or her head. I can't do it. And the pessimist, bitterly, but with some sense of victory, cries out, see, we're all doomed. None of us is good enough. To which God replies, not so. Did I not demonstrate my own love for you in this? While you were still sinners, Christ died for you. Have I not declared that you are all justified freely by my grace through the redemption that came by Christ Jesus? See, both the optimist and the pessimist were wrong, and it was good news to both of them. We're justified by our faith in the saving act of Jesus, and that is why we have peace with God. Peace with God. It's a statement of fact. That is the state that we find ourselves in, a description of our state. And in that state of peace with God, we can then experience the peace of God. The optimist is free to be optimistic, but is also freed from the crushing burden of responsibility. And the pessimist is freed from the crippling burden of guilt. Therefore, since we've been justified through faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have gained access by faith into this grace in which we now stand. So far, so good. Aha! Pipes up the fatalist. That's all very well. That might make you feel better now. But what hope is there in the future? I mean, what about all the suffering we still have to go through? And if we're honest, I wonder if this is how many of us feel right now. While there is some relief in the reminder that we have peace with God, that we're freed from the burdens of guilt and shame, the constant litany of disasters in our news feeds has robbed us of our hope for the future. And into this despair, God speaks. I have not reconciled you to me for no purpose. I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and future. And this is why Paul writes, and we boast in the hope of the glory of God. The future that we hope for is not one of our making or breaking, but one of God's design. And God's designs for us are good. So there is hope for the future. I don't know exactly what that looks like. I've got glimpses and pictures and snapshots of it. We get those all throughout Scripture and we see them in life. I don't know what the end of COVID and what the answer to climate change is, but I know that God has a future and plan in store for us, and it is a good one. Which brings us to the last bit of Romans 5 passage that I want to address. And I want to just address it very briefly, because the reality is, regardless of how optimistic or pessimistic we might be, we all experience suffering in life. Peace with God does not exempt us from suffering, and until God's plans come to fulfillment, we're actually warned to expect suffering. Which leads Paul to say this: not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. Now, at one level, it's an easy idea to grasp. The idea of suffering for a purpose is not new to us. We voluntarily submit ourselves to the potential pain of a dentist visit in order to retain healthy teeth. We train for sporting events. We study for exams. And the idea that suffering can produce perseverance and character and even hope is not novel. But let's be honest. It can seem a little trite and even perverse in the face of great suffering. The grieving parent may find little hope in the loss of a child. The families who lost homes in bushfires or floods, the businesses that went under during lockdown, the victims of online scammers, do we really expect them to glory in their suffering? Now, this is a complex question. It's worthy of a sermon all of its own. But here's my very brief take on it to finish. I don't think there is glory in the suffering. And I certainly don't think that God glories in our suffering, in the suffering of his people. But I do think that the God who grieves with the grieving, whose heart is broken by the hurts of his people, but who nevertheless allowed himself to suffer in our place, that is a God whose glory our suffering points to. We do not glory in suffering, but in our suffering, our gaze is directed to the glory of the God who suffers with and for us. And in that, we persevere, becoming in character more like Jesus and fixing our hope ever more firmly on him, because we know we cannot do it ourselves. Now, I want to give the last word today to Natasha Moore, because I've drawn from her work quite a bit. So she finishes her book, The Pleasures of Pessimism, with this little quote. And she makes reference to a John Steinbeck quote. It doesn't matter if you're not familiar with it, but you'll get the gist of it. She says this: "I believe with Steinbeck that the evil thing will never win. And, contra Steinbeck, I believe that the evil thing will one day die. I believe that there will be a true apocalypse, a laying bare of reality, an ultimate justice, a liberation from the cycles of history and the faultiness of Homo sapiens that doesn't involve passing the baton to a superior race and going gently into the good night. An apocalypse which culminates in the death of death itself, when God will wipe every tear from the eyes of his people. That apocalypse will indeed be welcome." And she goes on, "This is not to say that everything will be just fine. History reminds us that lots of things could go very badly, and some no doubt will. But a humble pessimism about human nature, coupled with a grounded hopefulness about the world, will be our friend as we process and respond to the manifold challenges of our particular moment. The hows, of course, are the difficulty. John W. Gardner, an advisor to several US presidents, used to say that what we face are breathtaking opportunities disguised as insoluble problems." To sign off then, a blessing upon you. May you have the pessimism to look steadily and unflinchingly at the problems, and the optimism to perceive and pursue the opportunities hiding behind them. May you have a blessed 2022, full of God's peace and full of hope. Amen. And of course, we go into this new year together. It's not something we do alone. God is with us wherever we go, and we have a community of people around us. We know that where two or three are gathered together in God's name, Jesus says, "There am I in the midst of them." And so we take a moment to greet each other with a greeting of peace, to encourage each other, to let the optimists lift our spirits. And so we say together, "The peace of the Lord be always with you." I want you to take a brief moment to just share with those around you in a greeting of peace.